Hey there, all you beautiful souls. I hope your day has been absolutely fantastic. It's a pleasure to have you back for yet another exciting episode of What If Naruto Was Transported Back in Time. Don't forget to pay a visit to the author of this captivating fanfiction and show them some love. You'll find the link waiting for you down in the description. If this what if is sparking your curiosity, drop a comment down below and share your thoughts. And while you're at it, don't miss out on exploring the plethora of other intriguing what ifs available on this very channel. Alright, let's not keep you waiting any longer, let's dive right into this thought-provoking video. Ruins of Tanzaku Town. Rashi stared ahead to the myriad of shinobi in front of him, a light sheet of sweat falling down his face, but he remained calm, despite the situation of facing down the son of a Kage and the famed Uchiha Itachi. Despite his skills, Asuma and Itachi's teamwork was strangely harmonious, with Asuma always taking charge and Itachi trailing behind him. Thankfully, it was only these two he was facing. At the very beginning of the battle, Sarutobi Asuma had told the group of genin to keep out of the battle, only allowing Itachi to fight alongside him. All he had to do was keep them preoccupied until his master was ready to deal with them. Asuma and Itachi eyed each other before the pair nodded at one another, and Asuma made the first move and dashed towards Rashi. Rashi took a step backwards and blocked the right hook that was aimed at his face, then took another step back and smacked Asuma's knee down from hitting his abdomen, then took a step forward and landed an elbow to Asuma's stomach. Asuma staggered backwards, but Itachi swiftly appeared before Rashi and aimed a kunai at his head, but Rashi ducked it and aimed a palm to Itachi's head, but Itachi skillfully maneuvered against the palm and kicked Rashi in the chest, which sent him staggering backwards. Asuma then darted from behind Itachi and landed two swift jabs to Rashi's chest, but Rashi managed to smack away a jab aimed at his face and punched Asuma in the face, which made Asuma stagger backwards. But just as Itachi leapt over Asuma's body, Rashi grinned and said Yoten. Shakugekiken, lava release. Scorching armored fist. Orange-red chakra began to pour over Rashi's body before it changed into lava itself before Rashi aimed a jab towards Itachi. Itachi managed to avoid the hit, but due to the intense heat, his cloak caught on fire. Itachi pulled off his cloak as Asuma snuck beneath him and shouted Futen. Tatapa, wind release. Great breakthrough. A powerful shockwave slammed into Rashi's body, which caused him to soar backwards, while also blowing the lava off of his body. Rashi managed to recover by slamming his feet into the ground to stop his flight. However, he saw Asuma following him and smirked. Doten. Tasakiryu, Earth style. Earth Dragon. Rashi shouted as he finished his hand seals. The Earth Dragon shot towards Asuma, but he heard Itachi's voice shout out Katen. Takaki no Jutsu, Fire style. Grand Fireball Jutsu. Rashi watched as his dragon was ripped apart by the flames of the comet-sized fireball heading his way and skidded to a stop, and slammed his hands to the ground as he shouted Doten. Dorihaki, Earth style. Med wall. And a large wall shot up from the smoke, with the head of a giant gorilla in the middle of it, its eyes glowing in orange-red. The comet-sized fireball slammed into the wall, causing particles of fire to fly from the sides of the wall. Yoten. Maguma Nagar, Lava style. Magma current. Rashi shouted as his palm smacked the wall in front of him. The gorilla had opened its mouth, and Rashi then took this chance and formed a hand seal and whispered Yoten Bushin no Jutsu, Lava clone technique. With a groan, Rashi threw up lava, which slowly began to form. A clone stood across from him. Rashi smirked and hinged into a small pebble. Just then, the Rashi clone heard Asuma shout Chakura 2. Maichimanji, Chakra Blade. Straight line. And seconds later, the wall before him was split in half by a wave of chakra before it tumbled forward, revealing Asuma leaping towards him. Katen. Takakyu no Jutsu. Itachi's voice shouted out suddenly. Asuma's body flickered into a burst of leaves, and Itachi's fireball was heading his way. With a snarl, Rashi shouted Yoten. Shakugeryugen no Jutsu, Lava style. Scorching rocks Jutsu. Rashi then spat out several large lava-filled boulders, which slammed into the fireball several times before it exploded, which sent Rashi flying backwards. Rashi recovered in midair, only to see Asuma appear before him, and with a shout, Asuma reared his right arm backwards. Bofunakuru, Windstorm Knuckle. Asuma shouted before he lunged his arm forward, causing huge funnel of wind to slam into Rashi's chest, sending the shinobi spiraling down to the ground head first. Just as Rashi was going to hit the ground, Itachi appeared to him a burst of black feathers, his Sharingan spinning wildly. Tsukiyomi, Itachi said calmly but without warning. Rashi smirked, its body turning a molten red. Sorry Chiha, but you lose. Yoten Bushin no Jutsu. Bushin Daibakuha, Lava clone technique. Exploding clone. Itachi immediately flickered out of existence just before the clone exploded, causing a large amount of lava to land on the ground, creating a large puddle of it. Itachi appeared in front of large puddle of lava, unaware of the now glowing pebble at his feet and muttered, he was not this strong before. Without warning, the pebble in front of Itachi exploded to reveal the real Rashi, who had both hands covered in lava. Yoten. Taja Yoten no T, Lava style. Multiple hands of lava. Rashi then slammed both palms into Itachi's chest, before following it up with several quick palms to Itachi's body, each strike causing the skin to melt before bursting into fire beneath Rashi's palms. And with the final strike to Itachi's face with his left palm, Itachi's screaming figure to burst into flames. But through the flames, Rashi noticed that Itachi smiled. "Ushindai Bakuha," Itachi whispered. Rashi barely had a chance to substitute himself with a large boulder before Itachi's clone exploded, causing the lava from Rashi's clone to seep into the larger crater that was made. Rashi appeared in the distance and fell to one knee and said that Uchiha is very crafty. It was then he heard Fuden Tatapa come from above him. Rashi looked up to see a huge shockwave of wind heading towards him from Itachi. "Shit, Doten. Tajidori Haki, Earth style. Multi-med wall." Rashi shouted, causing multiple walls of earth to shoot up from the ground at a curve to create a dome, causing the wind attack to slam against it so hard, the earth crumbled beneath its might, but the attack ceased as well. Rashi saw Itachi land in the distance, and quickly formed several hand seals before shouting out Yoden Shakugaryugen no Jutsu. Itachi turned around and quickly flickered away in a burst of black feathers, before the 7 large molten boulders managed to hit him. Hearing the earth behind him crack, Rashi turned around to see Asuma explode from the ground and land a solid right hook to his face, causing a long gash to appear on his left cheek from the trench knives attached to Asuma's knuckles. Asuma repeatedly punched Rashi in the face and chest, before Rashi blocked the final punch and tossed Asuma over his shoulder, sending Asuma into the air. "Yoten Shakugaryugen no Jutsu." Rashi then spat out several large lava-filled boulders towards Asuma, just as the Konoha shinobi hit the ground. Asuma swore and shouted Chakura too. Maichimanji, which caused his trench knife knuckles to glow before 2 blades of chakra appeared on top of his knives. Asuma swung the blades against the molten rock, slicing through them repeatedly, while Rashi smirked and said Yoden Shakugakuken, causing the familiar lava armor to flow against his body. Rashi then dashed towards Asuma, just as the shinobi sliced through the last boulder, and punched the shinobi in his face as hard as he could, which sent Asuma slamming into the ground. Rashi landed on the ground in a crouch, but as he stood up, he instantly grabbed the right hand of Itachi, which caused Itachi to barely flinch in pain due to the burning in his hand. "Not so tough now, are you?" Rashi said with a smirk before he kicked Itachi in the stomach, sending Itachi flying backwards onto the ground, his shirt showing a burned circle where Rashi's fist was. Itachi rolled backwards onto one knee and held his stomach in pain as Rashi smirked victoriously. "Now, it is time to end this," Rashi said as he began to form 10 seals before he finished with a shout of Yoden Keizen no Raijin, lava style. Volcanic Dragon King. After he took a deep breath, Rashi exhaled sharply, causing a large dragon made of molten lava and earth, with large amounts of ashy clouds, accompanying the creation of the large dragon. Itachi narrowed his eyes and began to form his own seals and shouted Amaterasu. Takaku no Jutsu. With a deep breath, a large comet-sized ball of black flames shot towards the large imposing dragon, which roared and charged to the large black comet. And once the two collided, a large explosion rocked the entire area. The two attacks battled for dominance as Rashi and Itachi forced more of their chakra into their respective attacks, until both jutsus exploded, sending all of the shinobi flying away from the blast zone. Ruins of Tanzaku Town. Shao Kahn. Shao Kahn was disappointed. His second-in-command had said these warriors were strong, but he was able to deal with them with ease. Even his daughter and the one who defeated that decrepit old fool Shinnok, whom he was currently engaged in combat with, were unable to touch him. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see the firefly rooted to one knee. It was obvious to Shao Kahn that he was rooted to that spot by the same sort of energy his subordinate held inside of him. How curious. Shao Kahn blocked the right hand of Teiwaya with his left hand, blocked the left hand of Hinata with his right, and used his right foot to block the left fist of Kurenai. "Foolish mortals think you can stop me," Shao Kahn told the three before he forced his foot forward, sending Kurenai bouncing backwards against the ground. He then released Teiwaya's hand only to grab her wrist and swing her entire body against Hinata's body, sending his daughter skipping against the ground like a rock skipping across water. He then twisted his body and launched Teiwaya into the air, and held out his right hand, and released an orb of crimson energy, which slammed into Teiwaya's body, and sent her sailing higher into the air. But to his surprise, his orb was destroyed, and Teiwaya came shooting down towards him, her body glowing with that same ethereal green energy that her father had when he met him so long ago. He held up his right arm and blocked her punch, but to his surprise, his feet sank slightly into the ground. "Impressive," Shao Kahn noted curiously as he looked up at the enraged face of Teiwaya's. "You haven't seen shit yet," Teiwaya shouted. Shao Kahn could feel energy bubbling to life against his palm. He then sensed the energy building up in her body flowing down into her arm, and instantly knew she was going to fire off an attack at point-blank range. Risky, but unfortunately for her, he knew it was coming ahead of time, so he began to form energy into his palm against hers. Before he knew it, an explosion of ethereal energy sent him flying backwards, while Teiwaya flew backwards in the air and landed in a crouch. Shao Kahn's feet slammed into the ground, causing the earth to uproot around his feet, before he stood upright and glanced at his right hand. A little scratched up but nothing serious. Meanwhile, he could see that his opponent was looking worse for wear after that burst of energy. He watched as Taewei fell to one knee, her right arm scratched up and bleeding from the elbow down. Shao Kahn watched as Taewei rose to her feet on shaky legs, the ethereal green energy around her body flickering on and off around her. Despite the distance, Shao Kahn could see the determination in her eyes, and it made him smirk. It was time to drive that determination to the ground. Shao Kahn began to walk to the barely standing Taewei, crimson energy flowing from his body like wisps of smoke, as his smirk broadened. He didn't have to rush for her. He was going to take his sweet time getting to her before he crushed her skull between his hands and took her soul. But he had to admit, there was a certain bravery that she showed, being unafraid of him. Without warning, he found his torso being wrapped with snakes. Snakes again, snake charmer. Shao Kahn asked as he looked behind him to see Anko, with snakes coming from her sleeves. Sorry, but your ass isn't going anywhere, Anko said with a determined smirk on her face. Shao Kahn laughed as crimson energy coursed against his body before it exploded, causing the snakes to tear off of his body. You're such a fool. Shao Kahn shouted before he dashed forward towards Anko, but as his fist connected with her body, she changed into a petal of flowers. Shao Kahn blinked in surprise at this. He was expecting blood and gore from his hit but not flowers. It was then felt something being uprooted from the ground, and before he could move, a large sakura tree had sprouted up and his body was melded into the tree. This was quite the weird technique. Without warning, Kurenai sprouted up from the tree above him with a kunai in her hand before she lunged her hand down, but without warning, Shao Kahn grabbed Kurenai's face and said, "Nice try, but no simple illusion will hold me down." Shao Kahn let out a shout and crimson energy exploded from his body, and the illusion was destroyed, before crimson beams began to shoot out from between his fingers. You ever wonder what death tastes like? Shao Kahn taunted. Let her go. Hinata's voice rang with fury out before she appeared in a flicker of Adenian magic, and slammed her knee into his outstretched arm, causing him to release his hold on Kurenai mere seconds before a ball of crimson energy shot out from his palm. Hinata landed on the ground in her Juken stance, where she struck 3 spots on Shao Kahn's chest, which caused him to stagger backwards at the sudden burst of pain. He then looked at her and saw he stand protectively over the ruby-eyed woman. So, his daughter cared for the woman, that will make things so much better. Hinata dashed forward and attempted to land several more strikes to Shao Kahn, but he managed to avoid each strike before he kicked her in the chest, sending her backwards into Kurenai, before he heard Kuchi's no jutsu come from behind him. Shao Kahn turned around only to hold his hands out, as the head of a large snake slammed into him, sending him skidding backwards against the ground, before he dug his feet down, and lifted the large snake into the, and slammed it onto his side. Shao Kahn then leapt into the air and slammed his feet into its neck, causing the large snake to gasp out in pain, before its head whipped up towards Shao Kahn. Shao Kahn grabbed its outstretched mouth and smirked before he let out a roar, and ripped the snake's jaw from its hinges, before tearing its bottom jaw off of the snake, only to turn around and throw the jaw at Kurenai and Hinata, who immediately jumped over the jaw. Shao Kahn took this chance to leap up from the snake's body, and grabbed both Kurenai and Hinata's faces, and drove them down to the ground hard, causing 2 craters around their bodies. He then picked up Kurenai and released his hold on her before landing a brutal straight punch to her chest, sending her soaring backwards into a brick wall of a large building, where she slammed into it and slumped over, unconscious. He then picked up Hinata by her neck and held her into the air. You truly disappoint me, my daughter, he told her as she squirmed against his grip. Go to hell. Hinata shouted. Not before the woman you care for, Shao Kahn retorted. He watched as the blood drained from Hinata's face at his words, before she turned her head just enough to see Kurenai still slumped over. Kurenai-sensei. Wake up. Please wake up. He could see the woman begin to stir at the shout, and that merely made it all the better as he held out his right hand and said, "One down," before he fired a massive orb of crimson energy towards Kurenai's form. No? Kurenai-sensei. Hinata wailed. The large ball of energy collided into Kurenai's form just as she looked up, and when it struck her, she was unable to even scream as her body was evaporated upon its impact, along with the building she had been leaning against. Kurenai-sensei. Hinata screamed in heartbreak and horror as Shao Kahn held out his other hand, and a soul flew from the now large crater and into his hand, where he placed it into his body as slowly as possible, as Hinata trembled with fury in his grip. He then raised her into the air and slammed her back first into the ground hard, causing the crater to grow upon impact. He could still feel her struggle, so he lifted her up again, then slammed her back down, but on the last lift up, Anko's knee slammed into his face, sending him flying backwards while releasing the kunoichi from his grasp. Shao Kahn pushed himself off the ground and landed on his feet, only to sidestep Anko's flying kick, and then block her 2 crisp jabs, before ducking her roundhouse kick, and he retaliated by punching in the chest hard enough to break 2 ribs, before he kicked her left leg, breaking her kneecap, before he gripped her head with both hands, and began to squeeze as hard as possible. Blood began to fall from Anko's ears and eyes, but she continued to struggle, fighting as hard as she could to escape his grasp, with an untold amount of hatred in her eyes, which made Shao Kahn chuckle. He could feel the amount of chakra in her movements, but once he had a target in his grasp, there was nothing anyone could do to stop him from getting what he desired. He could use her power within his new army, but for that he would need her soul. You fought hard, but it is time to say goodbye. So, goodbye Snake Charmer, he said before he twisted her neck hard, and Anko's body immediately went limp, her eyes fading into a dull white. 2 down, Shao Kahn whispered as he dropped her body to the ground. Her soul floated up from her body and immediately, he gripped it and forced it into his body. Join the others that have fallen before you and enjoy the rest, for I have plans for your soul. It was then he heard the sound of metal slicing the air. He knew that sound anywhere. Shao Kahn tilted his head back to avoid one Adenian fan that was aimed at his face. He turned his head to see Hinata knees rapidly approaching his face. Releasing Anko's head, Shao Kahn. He held up his left hand and blocked Hinata's knee, but her body shimmered out of existence once it touched his knee. Seconds later, he felt a sharp pain in his stomach, and when he looked down, he saw Hinata in front of him with left arm stretched forward. He then glanced down her arm and saw her hand gripping the closed fan, which was stabbed into his abdomen. Hinata then yelled as she stabbed her other fan into his chest, repeatedly stabbed him as she screamed this rage-filled scream. After the 10th blow to his body, he grabbed her wrist and slammed his palm into her outstretched arm, breaking her left arm, which caused Hinata to scream in agony, before he pulled out her fan, and stabbed her left shoulder arm with the fan. Hurts, doesn't it? He questioned, but before he could do any more damage, a green energy orb slammed into his hand, which caused his hand to whip back before Hinata leapt into the air, wrapped her legs around his neck, and with a shout, she forced her body backwards and launched him into the air backwards. Teiwei dashed forward with an orb of green energy surrounding her uninjured arm, and with a shout, she leapt up towards the oncoming Shao Kahn's body, and rammed her fist into his face, before the orb exploded in a brilliant burst of green light, which sent his body crashing into the ground. Smoke swirled around his body as he laid in the crater his body had created, and he let out a chuckle. He could hear his daughter and the elder gods better speaking. Did they truly think that attack would work? With the cross of his arms, he rose out from within the crater and levitated into the air, with an amused grin on his face at the horrified glare from both his daughter and her friend. Come the fuck on. The Redeed exclaimed. Shao Kahn landed on the ground and asked, need I remind you of who I am? Hinata rose to her feet and held her left shoulder in pain and said, a dead man in front of me is all that you are. Your words wound me, my daughter, Shao Kahn replied with a laugh. However, it is time I stop playing around. Shao Kahn uncrossed his arms, and his expression became serious. My daughter Katana. You served me well until that foolish Shaolin monk twisted you against me, but do not fret. Once your soul is in my possession, you will become mine once again. Shao Kahn suddenly flickered before Hinata and landed a brutal punch to her stomach, knocking the air from her lungs and breaking 2 ribs. He then grabbed her head between his hands in an attempt to crush her head. Fuck no. Teiwei shouted as green energy exploded around her. Teiwei leapt up and slammed her shoulder into his chest, which lessened his grip on Hinata's head, which thankfully caused her to fall to the ground. Teiwei then leapt up to kick Shao Kahn's head, but Shao Kahn grabbed her leg and crushed it in his grip, breaking her leg. Fuck. Teiwei shouted in agony before firing a shadow ball at Shao Kahn's head, which shattered into particles of green lights upon impact, while also causing him to release his opponent's leg. Teiwei landed on her back, but before she could try to escape, Shao Kahn's boot slammed onto her chest, breaking 3 of her ribs upon impact. Teiwei let out a silent scream, while Shao Kahn smirked and lifted up his foot off of her chest, but Hinata leapt up and covered Teiwei's body with her own, stopping Shao Kahn's onslaught. Shao Kahn was surprised by this action, but that quickly changed into fury. With a mighty kick, he kicked both Teiwei and Hinata away from him, both of their bodies slamming into the ground and rolling listlessly, before coming to a stop inches before Naruto. Field of Flowers. Momochi Haku. Haku didn't know where she was. The last thing he remembered was a massive explosion, and now she was standing in a field of flowers. The petals from the flowers floated in the gentle breeze around her, which caused her to close her eyes to enjoy the sweet smell of the flowers that was carried in the gentle breeze that overcame her. But when she opened her eyes, she saw a teenage girl standing a few feet away with her back turned to her. Her long black hair flowed against the breeze, revealing her pale skin, and her tattered rose-pink kimono with white flower decils, and a red obi sash around her waist flowed against the breeze as well. Haku noticed that the bottom of the kimono was torn off at the knees, and the top of the kimono hung loose around her shoulders, and he also noticed that feet were bare and caked with mud and dirt, and on her left hand, she was wearing some sort of golden trinket. Do you hear it, Momochi Haku? A female's voice asked her. Do you hear my blade call out to you? Why do you not heed its call? Heed its call? Haku repeated. The girl turned around and Haku gasped in surprise. She had seen this girl before. It was in Hisako, when she was critically hurt by Kimimaro. She remembered this face appearing to her before she woke up. I remember you, Haku whispered. I am glad, the girl replied with a sad smile. And yet you do not heed my call. But I don't hear this call at all, Haku explained. I can't do anything at all since I woke up in Hisako. Do not fret. Once you hear my call, all and more will come back to you, but until then, wake up, the girl said before she flickered out of existence, with the area fading to dark around Haku. Ruins of Tanzaku Town. Machi Haku. Hey Haku-chan, wake up, Sakura's voice softly. Haku opened her eyes with a dazed expression and mumbled Sakura-chan. Thank goodness, Sakura said with a sigh of relief. Haku leaned up off the ground and asked, what happened? No idea, Sakura said. Itachi and that guy were trying to defeat each other, then a dragon made of lightning hit their jutsus and then an explosion. I was the first one awake. What about everyone else? Haku asked. No idea, Sakura said. I just hope they are all okay, Sakura replied softly. I'm sure they will be, Haku said before her mind went back to the brief dream she had. Do not fret. Once you hear my call, all and more will come back to you, she recalled the voice saying within her head. What did it mean? It was then Haku heard the sounds of battle coming from the distance. Come on Sakura-chan, Haku said. Sakura nodded and the pair ran off towards the sounds. Ruins of Tanzaku Town. Yungenin Squad vs Rashi. Raiden. The Kazuchiryu no Jutsu. Lightning style. Lightning Dragon Jutsu. Kiri shouted as she summoned a lightning dragon towards Rashi. Rashi roared and shouted Yoden. Naguma Dangan, lava style. Magma bullet. Lava poured down his body and then formed a protective shell that took the shape of a bullet as he dashed through the dragon, shattering it when it got to the end towards the group. Kiri growled and shouted Raiden. Dendo Dangan, lightning style. Electric bullet. An aura of crackling electricity formed around her body as she dashed towards Rashi. Meanwhile, Shikamaru gathered the other genin and said, listen, I have a plan to try and stop him with my jutsu. I just need you guys to follow me lead. Kari and Rashi's respective elemental bullets slammed into each other before they darted to the left and clashed again before the two shot back, and clashed 3 more times before they rebounded sharply, their respective elements exploding from their bodies. Shikamaru quickly shouted Kajime no Jutsu, shadow paralysis technique. His shadow then shot out towards Rashi, who skidded to a stop and began to form hand seals, before he noticed the strand of shadow coming to him. Anare. Rashi stated before dashed backwards and said Yoden. Naguma Kaitai, lava style. Magma orb. He then opened his mouth and an orb of magma left his mouth and shot towards the shinobi group. Mashike no Jutsu, wall of insects jutsu. Shino exclaimed before a swarm of Kakechu left his body and swarmed around the group rapidly to shield them from the magma orb. The orb smashed against the insects, causing a majority of them to melt from the jutsu, but when they dispersed, the group was shown to be unharmed, but Shino was seen kneeling with chakra flowing around him. Kijutsu. Mushimeu, hidden jutsu. Insect cocoon, Shino murmured. He's going to need some time until more of his Kakechu are ready, Shikamaru said. Consider it done. Kiba exclaimed before he hunched down onto all fours. Akamaru leapt onto his back and with a grin, Kiba shouted Gijuninpo. Jujin Bushin, man-beast clone. With a burst of smoke, Akamaru had now changed into Kiba. The two began to glow briefly before they leapt into the air and began to spin rapidly with Kiba shouting, Jujin Taijutsu Ogi. Kitsuga, Beast Human Taijutsu Secret Art. Fang passing Fang. Rashi's eyes whitened as the 2 sharp tornadoes came towards him mid-leap and began to swarm over him, their claws digging into his body at such a fast pace that he could hardly defend himself from it. Ino, Shikamaru muttered. I'm trying to get a good read, Ino said as she focused on Rashi's form, sweat falling down the side of her face. Shikamaru narrowed his eyes and looked for any vantage point before he noticed a small still-standing building and looked at Ino and pointed to the building and added, go up there. When I activate my exploding tag, use your jutsu. Ino nodded and ran off to the last standing building, as Shikamaru looked to Choji and said go. Right? Choji exclaimed before he shouted Baika no Jutsu, expansion jutsu. Choji's body then expanded into large size before he began to spin rapidly. Nikiden Sensha, human bullet tank. Choji's body then shot out towards Rashi at top speed. The sharp tornadoes left an opening for him to escape, only for Choji's body to slam into his, sending both of them shooting backwards, before slamming into the remains of a brick-made building, which then crumbled from the impact. Seconds later, Choji's rotund body came flying out of the rubble and shrunk back down to his normal size. Kari. Shikamaru shouted. Raiden. Dendo Dangan. Kari shouted as she dashed forward with electricity forming around her body as she passed by Choji and slammed into the rubble and then into Rashi, just as he was standing up, sending both of them out from the back of the rubble. Carrie skidded to a stop as she noticed Rashi blocking her body with his forearms in X formation, and quickly dashed backwards, just as he shouted Yoden. Shakugaryugan no Jutsu. Several small molten rocks shot out from Rashi's mouth and towards Carrie, who maneuvered around the attacks, managing to avoid the majority of them, before the last one slammed in front of her, causing an explosion that sent her into the air. Rashi then smirked and shouted Oden. Dasakiryu no Jutsu, Earth Style. Earth Dragon. A large stone-made dragon shot out into the air towards Carrie. Thankfully for Carrie, Choji leapt into the air and pushed her aside with his shoulder, barely avoiding getting struck by the dragon. The two landed on the ground, and Carrie fell to one knee. Shit, I don't have a lot of chakra left, and I already took my soldier pill. Neither do I, Choji said. But at least I can make up for that with this. Choji took out a case that held 3 pills, and popped the green pill into his mouth, causing a burst of chakra to fill his being. Hang back, I'll hold him off as long as I can, Choji told her. Carrie stared at him for a moment before she nodded and ran back. Choji then turned around to see Rashi in the distance. Kiba then landed beside him and said, "Come on Choji." Before he leapt into the air and shouted Chujin Taijutsu Ogi. Kitsuga. Rashi saw this however and shouted Oden. Doryuhaki, Earth Style. Mud wall. And a large wall shot up from the smoke, with the head of a giant gorilla in the middle of it, its eyes glowing in orange-red. Rashi then shouted Yoden. Maguma Nagar, Lava Style. Magma Current. The gorilla had opened its mouth, and a large stream of lava came shooting out towards the oncoming Kiba. Choji saw this and said fuck. Duban Baika no Jutsu, Partial Expansion Jutsu. And grew out both arms to ginormous size. He then pushed himself into the air by his arms and caught the 2 cyclones, and bit his lip in pain, as he lifted them over the lava-spewing wall, and launched them towards Rashi. Seeing the cyclones coming towards him, Rashi growled and Doden. Tajudasakiryu no Jutsu, Earth Style. Multi-Earth Dragon. 2 dragons made of the earth itself exploded from the ground beside him, shot towards the dueling cyclones. A pair of jutsus clashed in the air, each one battling for dominance, but with an explosion of earth, Kiba and Akamaru was sent flying backwards into the air, where Choji leapt into the air and caught them with one hand, and threw a punch down towards Rashi with the other. Rashi jumped backwards into the air to avoid the larger-than-life fist from Choji, and landed on the ground and doubled over, sweat pouring down his face. Damn it, Rashi thought to himself. I'm running low on chakra due to my battles with that blasted Uchiha and Sarutobi, and with Son Goku locked away by Shao Kahn, I'm unable to use his chakra. I may find myself losing to a bunch of snot-nosed genin. While Choji landed on the ground and laid Kiba and Akamaru on the ground before his arms returned to their previous size, Shikamaru took out a kunai with an explosive tag on it, and glanced at Ino's location. He had noticed that Rashi had been doubled over, most likely due to either injuries or even chakra exhaustion. This would be our only shot to stall him long enough for Asuma-sensei or even Itachi to step in, Shikamaru thought to himself. I am ready, Shino said suddenly, snapping Shikamaru from his thoughts. Perfect. Do it now, Shikamaru said. Okakechu, Shino commanded with a raised arm, allowing his bugs to fly from his body, and towards Rashi was. Ino. Now. Shikamaru shouted as he launched the kunai as hard as he could towards Rashi, who saw the kunai and leapt into the air to avoid it, barely missing the explosion from the tag. Ino managed to hear the shout just as she reached the roof on one of the last remaining buildings, and saw Rashi leap into the air, and began to form a few hand seals, before she focused on Rashi, and said Shintention no Jutsu, mind-body switch technique. Ino then felt her soul fly out from her body, and with closed eyes, her soul slammed into Rashi's body. Seconds later, Rashi instantly felt his body go lax in the middle of the air. What the hell? He shouted out loud. Yada. I did it, Ino's voice rang out in his mind. The Yamanaka Rashi shouted in a panic. Damn right. Ino shouted victoriously. Choji. Shikamaru yelled out. Choji leapt into the air as Rashi's body fell to the earth and caught the body and landed on the ground and held the body down, while Rashi tried to squirm. No way are you getting out of this with this low amount of chakra, Ino exclaimed. Choji. Ino. Shikamaru shouted. Choji immediately leapt away from Rashi and Ino said bye-bye. Before she flew out of his body. Rashi didn't get a chance to move however because the moment Ino left his body Shikamaru skidded to a stop and shouted Kajime no Jutsu. Shikamaru's shadow shot towards Rashi's body and connected with his shadow. Kajime no Jutsu. Success. Finish it off Shino. Mashike no Jutsu, Shino said as he held up his arms, allowing his insects to fly from his sleeves, and towards Rashi's struggling body, and swarmed around him in a large orb. Kijutsu. Mashidama, Hidden Jutsu. Beetle Sphere, Shino said. The swarming orb of Kakechu began to lessen in size, as the Kakechu began to attach themselves onto Rashi's body, until his entire form was covered in it. If you can hear me Kansama. I fear I will die with this low amount of chakra. I need assistance. Rashi shouted in agony as the bugs drained him of his chakra and energy until he blacked out. And that is that, Choji said as he walked beside Shikamaru. Yahoo! We did it. Kiba shouted in excitement. Can't count him out yet, Shikamaru said as sweat began to fall from his face. He may have been low on chakra, but he was still able to match Asuma-sensei and Itachi in a 2-on-1 handicap battle. We can't let our guard down. Choji nodded and noticed Kari running with Sakura and Haku, and waved at them while he shouted, "About time you guys showed up. We thought you were killed." "What happened?" Haku asked as she looked at the swarm of insects in a human shape on the ground. "That is Rashi and we have him contained," Shikamaru said. "His chakra has been depleted," Shino said. "Also, he has fallen unconscious. He's completely powerless now," Shikamaru said as he released his hold on Rashi's shadow, and sat down with a sigh of relief. "Man, we really did great," Ino exclaimed as she ran up to Sakura and Haku, and gave them a brief hug. "Thank goodness you two are okay. We thought the worst had happened." She then looked back and asked, "Where is Sasuke-kun?" "He's not with you?" Sakura asked curiously. "No idea truthfully," Shikamaru replied. "But hopefully, he's still alive." "I hope so," Sakura said. While she didn't love Sasuke anymore due to her feelings for Naruto, that was still her teammate, and she hoped he was safe. "Well, we should get moving then. No telling what would happen if we stayed here," Kari said. The group nodded and began to walk off, with Choji picking up Kiba and Akamaru and carrying them off. "I will say, I'm glad we were able to defeat him," Shino said. "If it went on any longer, I sincerely doubted our chances of survival." It was then that Ino paused mid-step, a feeling of overwhelming panic filling her core. The other genin stopped and looked at her curiously, with Shikamaru asking, "What's wrong, Ino?" "She can sense what is to befall you," a voice said from behind them. The group of genin turned around but without warning, a medium-sized beam of orange-red chakra shot out towards Ino. "Ino, look out!" Shino exclaimed as he pushed Ino away, and due to this, he was struck in the chest by a beam, which then forced itself from out of his back, while knocking him off his feet. As Shino fell to the ground, his glasses flew off his face and landed in front of Ino, his now all-white eyes becoming visible to the group. The group screamed in horror as Shino's lifeless body laid on the ground, blood pooling from the gaping wound in his chest. Then, a small green orb flew out from his body and floated in the air, before it was immediately sucked away by an unseen force. "Shino!" Kiba wailed in horror before his eyes turned to the now standing Rashi, who had an orange-red aura around him, his right arm pointing towards them with his index finger out. "I'll kill you." Kiba roared before he dashed towards Rashi. "Kiba, no!" Shikamaru shouted out. Kiba and Akamaru leapt into the air and shouted Jujin Taijutsu Ogi. Bitsuga. The twin cyclones sped towards Rashi's form, but he remained rooted to his spot, a grim smirk on his face. "Yoten. Maguma Burju, lava style." "Magma blade," Rashi said as the chakra around him formed a blade made of molten magma. He took a step backward as the cyclone came towards him, and gave mighty swing towards one of the cyclones. The cyclone that was struck immediately stopped to reveal Akamaru, cleaved in half diagonally from the blade, his eyes wide in agony, before his body exploded into flame and then ashes in the wind, leaving only a tiny green orb, which shot off into an unknown direction. Rashi then turned around as the enraged roar of Kiba echoed through the remaining cyclone, and charged for Rashi, who took another swing of the magma-made blade, once the cyclone got close, and that was when the cyclone faded away, along with Kiba's rage-filled scream. Kiba's upper body fell to the ground near the group, while his lower body tumbled a few feet behind his upper body, his eyes as wide as the deceased Shino's. An ethereal green orb floated off from Kiba bodies just before the flame swallowed it whole and changed it to ashes, hovered in the air before it shot into an unknown direction. "Oh my god," Sakura whispered as she covered her mouth in horror. "This is the power that Shao Kahn holds children," Rashi said as he spread his arms out, his fiery aura following his movements. "I had no chakra thanks to you fools, and he granted me a full boost. And all I have to do is give him your souls as payment." Rashi then held up his right hand, and held up 3 fingers, and that is 3 souls so far. He then smirked. "How many more can be taken in such a short span?" Ruins of Tanzaku Town. Uzumaki Naruto. "How the mighty have fallen," Shao Kahn said as he walked towards the trio. "My daughter now at my heel." Shao Kahn slammed his left foot onto Hinata's wounded left shoulder, causing her to scream in agony. The conqueror of the fallen elder god, humbled and silenced. Shao Kahn held his right arm out and crimson bolts of lightning shot from his hands, and collided against Awaya's body, causing her to scream in agony, electricity coursing through and against her body. "And the only one who could stop me is the firefly, held down by a demon afraid to die," Shao Kahn finished as he stopped the lightning, allowing Teiwaya to writhe in agony. "It's a shame really that your demon, just like Rashi's, is afraid of someone with my power." "I'll kill you," Naruto hissed out in fury, embers of flames rising around his body. He had been trapped here, watching as his friends were beaten and bloody, while hearing his other friends' screams in the distance, unable to move due to his prisoner keeping him as still as a rock. The blood in his veins was boiling with fury. His teeth were bared and his eyes glowing white. Shao Kahn then grinned and shut his eyes as 3 souls slammed into his body, causing a brief ripple against his skin, before a burst of power exploded through him. In the span of several minutes, 5 strong souls have been given to me, and they won't be the last. Shao Kahn smirked and pointed his right index and middle finger to Naruto. Because Firefly, I get to have your soul as well, the soul Quan Kai kept from me all those years ago. So come and join your friends in my collection. And with those words, Shao Kahn shot out a beam of crimson energy that shot through Naruto's chest and through his back. No? Teiwei exclaimed in shock. Naruto-kun. Hinata exclaimed in horror, tears brimming in her eyes. Those were the last words and the last thing Uzumaki Naruto heard before it all went black. Unknown location. Hatake Kakashi. Where am I? Kakashi asked himself with narrowed eyes. When Kakashi had awakened, he found himself laying down in a large plain filled with flowers. Last he recalled, he was in a destroyed Tenzaku town. You are finally awake, a voice said from behind him, which prompted Kakashi to turn around, but no one was there. You must wake up, the voice said against his ear, which caused Kakashi to look to the left sharply, but again there was no one there. A burst of lightning slammed in front of him, which caused Kakashi to take a step back. When the lightning faded, he saw Naruto, Hinata, that girl that was with Naruto, Haku, Neji, Lee and several others behind them, but they were hidden in the shadows. They must live, the voice said from beside him. If they don't, this realm is lost. Realm? What in the hell are you talking about? Kakashi asked. Without warning, a beam of lightning slammed into his body, which caused Kakashi to scream out in surprise and in pain, as the wounds he had accumulated after being taken down by Shao Kahn began to heal. They must live. And then everything went white. Ruins of Tenzaku Town. Hatake Kakashi. Kakashi let out a groan as he pushed the rubble off of his body. Kakashi's flak jacket and shirt was completely gone, revealing his scarred torso, and there were several rips in his shinobi pants, and his mask was completely removed, revealing his surprisingly handsome face. But despite the state of his clothing, he looked and felt 100%. He looked around and in the distance, he could see Shao Kahn standing near Teiwaya and Hinata, but when he looked, he saw Naruto on his back and Anko on hers, and there was no sight of Kurenai. A deep unsettling feeling formed in his chest as he used his Sharingan to look at both Anko and Naruto. They weren't breathing. No, Kakashi said to himself with horror in his voice. It couldn't be possible, they were. Kakashi let out a furious yell before he formed several hand seals and shouted Rikiri. Kakashi knew that Shao Kahn wouldn't be done with that, so with a shout, he aimed his hands down, and began to form lightning into them. He heard the dragon roar before it was dispersed over the sound of electricity exploding into life over his hand. Once enough was gathered in his hand, he roared and dashed towards Shao Kahn, covering over a shocking amount of speed. Shao Kahn barely managed to turn around when Kakashi's weaponized hand struck his chest. But Kakashi's momentum was too great. Despite striking Shao Kahn, Kakashi continued to move forward until Shao Kahn's feet left the ground, and the two dashed into the air, leaving only a streak of electricity behind them. Hinata clawed herself to her knees and crawled to Naruto's body. Blood had begun to halo around his body, and his white eyes were staring out into the sky above, but it was then she noticed something. His eyes were still glowing white. Thanks for listening. I do hope you enjoyed. If you want the next part of this video, like, subscribe and comment down below, and turn on the bell notification. And also check out other videos that I have created and enjoy. See you in the next video. Peace.